Hey, well, what's up, guys? Welcome back to The Collision. Daniel here, and Disney is back to sweep and transport viewers off to strange, exciting new worlds. The movie Strange World just hit theaters. I've seen it, so let's talk about it. So this is going to be an interesting movie to talk about. There's a lot going on. I think there's going to be a movie that people have, surprise, surprise, people are going to have opinions on it. People are probably most likely going to share those opinions on the internet. But I do think there is some stuff to get into and to talk about and kind of to break it down. But before we do that, a couple kind of housekeeping things. I've been through the gauntlet with Turning Red and Lightyear. I know how these things normally go. So two things right off the start. One is, we're not here to kind of rant and rave about Disney or just Hollywood in general. We're just here to kind of focus on this movie and really have an honest discussion of what is in that movie, but just sort of keep the focus on that. And the second thing is just that, again, like with all our reviews here at The Collision, really the purpose is not to tell anyone how to think, what movies to watch, what movies not to watch, but just to look at what the movie is, share some of my thoughts, kind of give you some things to think about, keep the conversation open in the comments section, as long as we're civil to talk about these things. So I do think it is important as Christians to have these conversations. But let's just jump right into to Strange World, and probably the biggest... the most obvious comparable would be to the previously mentioned Lightyear movie. These things have a lot in common. Both are kind of original kind of science fiction exploration movies that also kind of have a controversial kind of inclusion of more LGBTQ storylines or subplots. So I think a lot of the feelings are going to be kind of a retread of some of that movie. But I will say from the start that kind of from top to bottom, in really every way, Strange World is a vastly superior movie than Lightyear was, which is actually a movie that I enjoyed more than a lot of people, maybe more than a lot of Christians did. And there's definitely a lot of stuff that in this movie that I think is a strength and that is good to appreciate. Although on the other hand, it also leans more heavily into the most controversial element of the Lightyear movie, namely kind of the LGBTQ kind of same-sex romance subplot. So like I said, I expect this will be somewhat of a divisive film, and we'll get to the kind of some of the sexuality stuff and some of that conversation in just a moment with the content and with the things. So first, let's just look at this movie as a movie itself, and I'd say probably the main thing that stands out to this about this movie is that it is an absolute visual feast. I don't think it's exaggeration or over the top to say that this might be the most like stunning or just like beautifully animated film that I have ever seen. This thing is phenomenal. I saw this in a big Dolby theater, so I had the full experience to see all those textures. But this thing is just bursting with colors, bursting with like just amazingly kind of fine-tuned details and textures. And there are moments where this really does seem like the animators are just showing off, whether it's like the grease bubbling as they're cooking, or just like I said, some of those textures and stuff, where they're definitely pushing the craft to kind of new heights, and even just with the stylization, kind of showing some creativity there. They do some interesting stuff with this movie. There's a couple kind of the standout moments, at least to me, where the style like morphs into more of like a classic kind of hand-drawn animated aesthetic that's sort of based on like comic books and stuff, and it's brilliant. It's exciting. They don't do it a ton. I think regardless of what viewers think of like any other part of this movie, it's hard to deny that Strange World is a great visual accomplishment. It is a success in that way. The story itself, I don't think ever reaches, kind of soars to the same height as the visuals, although it is an entertaining enough story that does have some interesting ideas kind of scattered throughout. And I think kind of, again, not to continue to make the comparison to Lightyear, but kind of like that movie, this is a movie that seems like it's not trying to be aimed exclusively at like younger audiences, and it's kind of more, I think maybe for better or worse, trying to tell like a good, solid quality science fiction story. And there, especially at the end, there's some plot twists and just sort of some exploration of just, I think, as a science fiction nerd, that's some like juicy kind of sci-fi concepts that I do think will be a film that like, can appeal to more than just like kids, but adults can definitely kind of enjoy some of that as well. But at the same time, the story although it has some interesting ideas and obviously is beautifully animated, it just never feels as fun as maybe it seems like it should with all the tools that it has at its disposal. Kind of the alien creatures, like the antagonists for this, like the little minions and stuff. They're terrifying. They are like an imposing, kind of disturbing threat for the good guys. But like the actual action scenes and moments of action just don't have the same kind of inventiveness as like the visuals do. Where a lot of it just sort of feels like kind of, okay, here's the action scene, then we move on. There's nothing super captivating or gripping with that. And kind of another consequence, and maybe it's partially at trying to aim at like a wider audience rather than like kids, is that this movie just doesn't have a whole lot of humor. There's not a whole lot of laughs in this movie. There's kind of the family pet, which is sort of like lovably stupid and just sort of like careless and doesn't help in any way and always getting in trouble. And the dog is one of the best characters in this and definitely is responsible for some laughs. But at least to me in my theater, was maybe responsible for the only laughs. There's not a whole lot of humor. It does play it kind of almost surprisingly, I guess, kind of straight. As far as like content, things to consider on the surface of this. Profanity, there's no profanity. Violence, there's no violence, although one character does like a pilot kind of get pulled out of the cockpit by sort of this alien creature thing. You never see the character again. I'm assuming he didn't make it, although you don't see the character die, and they never address it in the movie. But this is a cartoon. There's no blood or anything like that. Sexuality, obviously, this is where a lot of the conversation, like before the movie was released, where a lot of the conversation has happened. I'm suspecting a lot of the conversation after the release will focus on this. And it really is centered, this movie, kind of the heart of this movie is a 16-year-old boy named Ethan, who is very clearly depicted as a gay character. In kind of an early scene in the movie, he sort of meets with his crush named Diazo. And he kind of starts acting all shy and bashful, and they kind of engage in what their other friends call like cute flirtation. And although Diageo, his crush, only appears in person in that one scene, kind of all throughout this movie at various stages, he's discussed, and Ethan kind of talks about kind of works through his feelings, and his motivation for a lot of his quests and adventures is to kind of do something that's cool that might impress Diazo and kind of other characters like his grandfather and his mother kind of give him like romantic advice. And so although like the two characters are only on screen for like a few seconds near the start of the film, that subplot is very much kind of at the core of this movie and the core of his character. And we'll get into that a little bit more in just a second with kind of some of the themes, because I do think it's inseparable from some of the themes and kind of worldview that's going on in this movie. But just sort of other content stuff. One other thing to consider, there's a moment where the grandfather character and the father character kind of crack open two bottles, and the film doesn't describe or like name what is inside of those bottles. It seems from the context that clearly those are some kind of alcoholic beverage of some variety. And they're kind of drinking, and they kind of say after it, let's go get another drink before it's too late. Or so again, for all we know, maybe it's apple juice. The film doesn't say, but just definitely keep that in mind as well. As far as kind of themes going on, kind of like beneath the surface of this thing, I think things for Christians to kind of think through and wrestle. And the first and probably the most prominent is the kind of the whole topic and aspect of the sexuality of Ethan's character. Whereas like Lightyear kind of brought that conversation, kind of sparked that conversation for having sort of that subplots kind of in the background. With Strange World, it's a little bit different because it, unlike Lightyear, which is sort of contained almost exclusively kind of in that scene, and then they never reference it again. Like I said, the sexuality in Strange World is very much kind of throughout the entire film, and beyond just kind of it being referenced or just the fact that he is a gay character. I think it does kind of also serve the basis of a lot of the kind of the message or like the worldview that is in this film, because in a lot of ways this film almost operates in at least in some degree, as like an allegory or like a metaphor for exploring sexuality, kind of the strange world of the movie. In some ways, kind of works as as a metaphor for kind of the strange world of kind of sexuality, and sort of that framework is most clearly kind of made evident. There's a conversation but maybe about halfway through the film where Ethan is talking with his mother, and his mother's kind of talking and kind of chiding him about his crush on Diazo. And then they kind of shift that conversation to talking where she comments on, hey, you just seem like you're in a really good place right now as we're exploring. And Ethan kind of says, like, hey, I don't know why, but I just feel the most like myself since we've been out kind of exploring. And kind of the end of that conversation, the mother says to him, keep exploring those feelings. They might lead you down some interesting paths. And then she kind of almost like looks at the camera and like almost says everything but like wink at the audience. And it just seems from the context of that scene that very clearly they're drawing those two kind of conversation topics together. That just as he is sort of most himself by exploring this world, that kind of this bigger world that some people see as strange, that he's also kind of most himself kind of in the sexuality, kind of exploring sexuality, even if some people might think that's strange, and that he kind of won't be happy just by restricting himself to more the narrow, kind of smaller world that maybe kind of the more traditional world. And even at the end of this film, almost, I think it's the last words of this is a voiceover from Ethan. Again, some of it's hard to talk about without kind of spoiling some of the the plot points. But kind of the closing lines of the mill, and kind of paraphrase it a little bit, but where Ethan says, the world has changed and continues to change. You can't live in the past. We're moving forward. We're not there yet, but the best legacy we can give is preparing a better future. Again, if kind of taken in the whole context of this film, it does seem like this film, not only sort of just the fact that it just has a gay character and that that's part of his character, but that is sort of part of sort of this message or this push that kind of almost against kind of closed-minded, that we need to adapt with the world and kind of accept the sort of newer frontier of kind of exploration. I can't just stay kind of where we are and kind of need to push towards a brighter future. So you can definitely see how that sort of ends up becoming into kind of the worldview of this thing. I think obviously as Christians, there's a lot you got to wrestle through with that, is kind of look at that through the lens of Scripture. One other kind of theme in this thing that I think maybe will be more universally easily accessible for Christians, there is I think a wholesome kind of generational theme in this. Kind of the three kind of main characters are three generations: the grandfather, the father, and then Ethan. And the film does some interesting stuff with that. You kind of see a family through three generations as they kind of work out some of their family drama. And kind of Ethan's father, which sort of resents his own father and strives to just sort of be different and nothing like the father he had for Ethan, and kind of through their experiences realize that he's in a lot of ways doing the same things, kind of forcing expectations on Ethan rather than kind of learning to see what is actually best for his son. So I do think there's some interesting kind of generational stuff, and maybe kind of themes that can even appeal more to like the parents bringing the kids than like the kids for this. So in the end, I think there's a lot to appreciate about Strange World. Obviously, there's also some stuff to take into consideration. It is an entertaining kind of science fiction movie with beautiful visuals and a very front and center kind of same-sex LGBTQ subplot. And obviously, how you approach that, whether you accept it as just sort of like here's a different perspective on things, or whether you kind of walk through that, or whether you just sort of avoid it and kind of don't go to the theater. That you'll have to decide that on your own. But hey, I would love to have a conversation about this as long as we're civil and not just yelling at each other and ranting. But I think this is a conversation that we can have. So if you do see this movie, or if you just have any question, you're not sure if you if you want to go, if you're going to take your kids or anything like that, let me know in the comment section. I'd love to have that conversation with you. If you haven't done so, I encourage you guys, subscribe to our channel. We've got a lot of other stuff going on here, video reviews and live streams and other stuff. And we'd just love to have you be a collider, be a part of that. But most of all, guys, thanks for watching. Stay safe and continue to collide through a world for Christ.